Thinking Aloud. Conversations on the leading edge of knowledge and discovery with psychologist Jeffrey Mishlove.
Hello and welcome. I'm Jeffrey Mishlove. Today we are going to explore the concept of synchronicity. With me is Professor Christian de Quincey, who is Dean of Consciousness Studies at the University of Philosophical Research. He is also on the faculty of John F. Kennedy University and Sophia University. He is the founder and director of the Wisdom Academy and has also written many books, including Radical Nature, Radical Knowing, Consciousness from Zombies to Angels, Deep Spirit, Cracking the Noetic Code, and Blindspots, 21 Good Reasons to Think Before You Talk. Welcome again, Christian.
Oh, Jeffrey, good to be here again.
Good to be with you. Synchronicity is a concept that was introduced into the modern Western vocabulary largely through the writings of the great Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung.
Yes, and he defined it, interestingly, as an acausal connection through meaning. He was basically referring to what in the vernacular is often referred to as coincidences.
But not just coincidences.
No, that's what he was pointing out, is that these are not just coincidences, that there's actually some deeper meaning happening here, and a deeper connection. A coincidence is usually two events that happen simultaneously but have no relationship, no connection. What Jung was pointing out is that in synchronicity we have two events happening simultaneously. However, they are deeply connected, but not connected through any cause-effect relationship. They're connected through acausally, meaning without any cause. They're connected through meaning, shared meaning.
So he's suggesting that the meaning is more than a coincidence, though, because every coincidence would be acausal, presumably.
Every coincidence would be acausal, but not every acausal coincidence is only a coincidence. It's also a synchronicity when it involves an experience of deep and meaningful.
And I think when Jung introduced the term, being a dynamic psychiatrist looking at the depths of the unconscious mind, he was thinking about how people, the classic example is a patient describing a dream in which the Egyptian scarab beetle appears, and as she's describing her dream, there's a tapping on the window, and outside is a large beetle, a scarab beetle, making a big fuss and a big noise. At the very same time the dream is being described, as if to sort of punctuate the dream, to say this is important.
Yes, and of course that Jung, being very alert, pointed out, he said, that's exactly what I mean by synchronicity. And the dreamer was impressed by the coincidence that a golden scarab beetle should appear at a window in Switzerland. I think that's where it was at the time. And they were unknown there. They're Egyptian beetles. The species of beetle doesn't occur in that part of the world. Nevertheless, just at the moment when she was recounting a dream where a scarab beetle appeared that had very deep significance for her in the dream, this real, actual beetle tapped on the window. Was that just a coincidence? Well, it certainly was a coincidence, but it was very clearly a deeply meaningful coincidence for both Jung and his client, and he used that as an example of a synchronicity.
Well, I think a lot of people today, when they use the term synchronicity, and what they really are thinking is that there's some other agency involved in causing them. For example, John Lilly, a very popular writer, talked about two dolphins, as it were, Earth coincidence control. He called them echo, Earth coincidence control, as if somewhere in another realm, a spirit realm or a divine realm of some sort, someone's pulling the strings. That we're all part of a larger game. I think Lily would be comfortable calling it a game, and that's the source of these synchronicities.
Yes, and it's very interesting how we seem to be conditioned, whether it's genetic or whether it's cultural remains open to investigation, but we seem to be conditioned to think mechanistically.
Yeah.
A mechanism is essentially something that causes something in one point of space that then transfers energy across space to some other point in space.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're always looking for these physical causes, these mechanistic causes to account for the events that happen that we are aware of. What Jung was emphasizing is that there are events that happen that are not related through sharing of energy, but are causally, but are related acausally, non-causally, through a sharing of meaning that doesn't involve the transmission of energy through space. One of the reasons I'm attracted to the idea of synchronicity is because it is consistent with the understanding that consciousness, the psyche, is not something that occurs in space. It is aspatial or non-spatial, and therefore distance doesn't have any relevance to communication through meaning in consciousness. Consciousness communicates through meaning, energy communicates through mechanism.
Well, you, in our previous interviews, have often referred to yourself as a panpsychist, sometimes as a pan-experientialist, by which you mean that there is a consciousness that pervades the universe from top to bottom.
Yes, that consciousness is intrinsic to the universe, that every molecule, every atom, every subatomic particle in the universe has its own degree of consciousness, its own degree of sentience, and that all beings are constantly feeling and communicating telepathically with all other beings. They're obviously molecules and single cells don't have senses, so they're not communicating through sensory communication. Nevertheless, they are communicating non-sensory, extrasensory, telepathically.
So one might think of these synchronicities as messages from the universe as a whole.
That's how I would describe them. Again, going back to the panpsychist perspective, I often talk about what I call the cosmic democracy, that the universe is populated by innumerable gazillions of sentient beings, and every sentient being, from the smallest quantum to the largest organism, is making choices at every moment. And so we might think there would be a cacophony of choices being made. And in some ways, you could say there is, but also there is a harmony, that each of us gets to vote in the cosmic democracy, but none of us gets to decide the outcome. The outcome is decided by the community of choices that are made at any particular moment. So these choices are being picked up by our psyches, that every being, from the perspective of the panpsychist cosmology, every sentient being is in communication ultimately with every other sentient being. So we are picking up messages not just from the people around us, or indeed other animals around us, or from the natural world on the planet Earth, but ultimately we are picking up meaning and messages from the entire cosmos at every moment.
The parapsychologists have looked at the concept of synchronicity in many different ways. Some suggest that often synchronicities occur as a result of precognition. An example might be, I'm driving on the freeway and accidentally I take a wrong turn. So I've exited on the wrong exit, but lo and behold, I've avoided an accident that way.
Yeah, I find the idea of precognition fascinating, because clearly there are so many examples of ostensibly people picking up information from the future.
Yes.
But however, as a philosopher, I've investigated the idea of precognition, and it seems to me that that cannot really be what's happening. And why do I say that? Well, time. in one of my books called Blindspots, I talk about, I critique the idea that time is an illusion,
Yes.
that everything takes time. So what is time? Well, time is the difference between present, past, and future. Past, present, and future. The past is events that have happened. The present is events that are happening, and the future is events that have yet to happen.
Mm-hmm.
Well, since the future consists of events that have yet to happen, the future doesn't yet exist by definition.
Mm-hmm.
If the future did exist, then it wouldn't be the future, it would be the present. So by definition, the future doesn't yet exist.
Mm-hmm.
Therefore, we cannot be picking up information from something that doesn't exist. So we're not picking up information from the future in ostensible cases of precognition. So what's going on? Because the phenomenon is there. So here's what I think is happening,
Yes.
is that in sufficiently sensitive enough states of awareness, of consciousness, people are tapping into the quantum probabilities that are unfolding in the present moment. And so that precognition is really a form of deep telepathy, that we are communicating, picking up information from the quantum probabilities in the present moment, and we are able to read the trajectory of the unfolding of the quantum probabilities. And the more sensitive we are to those probabilities, the more likely we are to sense what the likely outcome would be.
Mm-hmm.
So precognition is not reading the future, it's a deep reading of the present moment.
Well, may I challenge that
Please do.
A little bit? Because
Yes.
what you're doing here is you're taking a philosophical position. You're using logic to try and address what might ultimately be a scientific question that could be answered through research and experiment that might have an empirical answer. Mm-hmm. And philosophers do this often, and for good reason. I mean, we do want things to be logically consistent, but mm-hmm. isn't it the case that any form of logic, such as the one you've just explicated, starts with assumptions? And we've talked about the need to always question our assumptions, and it seems that many times it turns out that at some future time we'll learn that the assumptions aren't quite correct.
That's very possible. That's
Mm-hmm.
very possible. And as a philosopher, I'm very aware of the limitations of logic and reason.
Yeah.
And I'm in love with logic and reason as a philosopher. And part of the reason I love logic and reason is that it's logic and reason that tells me that logic and reason has limits. There are limits to logic and reason. And reason also tells me that the edge of logic and reason is not the edge of knowledge, nor is it necessarily the edge of reality. That there may well be, it's logical and reasonable to be open to the possibility that there are domains of reality that transcend what reason can achieve, and that we need some other mode of knowing to enter that level of reality. All of that is what reason tells us. Mm-hmm. It tells us that the edge of reason is not necessarily the edge of reality or the edge of knowing, that there may be other ways of knowing that can give us access to other domains of reality. Reason tells us that, but reason cannot make the leap from here to there. We need to shift into some other way of knowing.
Now, with regard to precognition, of course, what you're saying is one potential interpretation, that we're reading the probabilities, even at the quantum physical level of probability waves, Schrodinger waves,
yes.
as they're sometimes called.
Right.
But I do know that in the field of quantum physics, there's a lot of interest these days in what's sometimes called backwards causality. That at the quantum level, time doesn't necessarily only move in one direction. It can move just as easily, symmetrically, backwards and forwards. So
okay.
There may be other solutions to the problems of time.
Yes, I'm glad you brought that up, because I've looked at that, and here's my take on that, is that, and it's something that a philosopher and cosmologist that we both have known and admired for a long time, Arthur Jung, pointed out, that that time, as discussed in physics, is represented by the lowercase letter t, is not the time that we actually experience. that the time that physicists talk about is really a spatialized version of time, and therefore isn't really time at all. It doesn't account for the experience of duration. Right now, if you and I were to close our eyes, or indeed just continue with our conversation, we can feel that we are enduring from one moment to the next.
Right.
That's what time is the experience of duration. The T in physics does not account for that. It translates time into a form of space. Einstein did it, and this was one of the reasons that Arthur Jung felt uncomfortable with some of Einstein's work, is because he had denuded time. He sucked out its durational experience and left us with a naked husk that isn't really time at all. It's just time transformed into a spatial dimension, which doesn't really count for duration.
Well, how does that relate now to our topic of synchronicity?
Okay, let's see. Synchronicity refers to two events occurring simultaneously in time. Simultaneity. So that is something and of course, synchronicity involves the experience of deep meaning. And as we discussed earlier in this conversation, meaning is something that occurs in consciousness. And consciousness is not something that exists in space, but it does exist in time. Consciousness is something, experience is something that we experience enduring from moment to the next, as I just mentioned. So consciousness transcends space. It's not a spatial phenomenon.
Which would bring me back then to the argument that maybe consciousness itself is the cause of a synchronistic event. I'll give you one example from Carl Jung's writings. He and Freud were very close to each other.
I remember this one.
But they had a breaking up. They split from each other, and it was a painful split because Jung was the favored student of Freud. He was like a son to Freud, but they broke apart, and in the process of doing so, they at one time had a heated discussion, and while they were talking, a loud crack appeared in the room. I think it was a heavy oak dresser or something. The wood just split apart, and Freud looked at it and was astonished, and Jung felt a burning sensation in his gut, and he said to Freud, "It's going to happen again one more time." He knew. Then it happened, and you surely get the sense from that story that Jung felt that perhaps at a psychokinetic level he was about to cause that to occur. It was part of the energy of this rupture between these two great figures in psychiatric history.
Yeah, and of course, as we know, Freud was really angry at Jung for underscoring because Freud did not accept synchronicity as Jung did. Here's what I think, though, as an alternative explanation. Rather than Jung or Freud, or the combination psychokinetically occurring, causing this rupture in the bookcase or the dresser, whatever it was, that actually what was happening is that Jung was reading deeply into the quantum probabilities of what was happening in the bookcase or the dresser. And so he intuited what was about to unfold. Not that he caused it, but he was feeling the unfolding of what was about to happen.
But it was more than that, in the sense that loud noise was an expression of the emotional tension between these men.
Yes.
That's the meaning.
Yes. And so again, from the panpsychist position, the emotion, the energy of the anger and the frustration that both men were experiencing was itself experienced by the atoms and the molecules in the room around them, including within the bookcase or the dresser, whatever it was. And so it was responding, sharing in the meaning. So that again underscores and supports Jung's interpretation of synchronicity as an acausal sharing of meaning, an acausal connection through meaning.
It also suggests that consciousness itself partakes of more than just our bodies. If everything is conscious, then our consciousness partakes of all of that.
Yes, that consciousness, because it's non-spatial, is universal. Is that all consciousness is aware of what's happening in every other sentient being. And so there is this sharing of meaning. I think one of the reasons that we have evolved brains is as a filtering mechanism. We don't want to be bombarded with what William James called the blooming, buzzing confusion of every piece of information entering us at every moment.
Right.
How could we operate with that? So we have developed these brain mechanisms to filter out the information coming at us.
Yeah, no doubt we block out 99.999% of everything we might otherwise experience.
Yes. So we're very selective in what we bring into the present moment. But what I would say, and I think this is consistent with Jung, is that potentially we have access to all of that at every moment. And I think this is what shamanic practices do, and mystical and spiritual practices do, is they cultivate a quality of sensitivity in consciousness that allows us to expand or to open up the sluices of the filtering mechanism so we allow in more information.
I've sometimes heard the human body described as spiritual tissue. It's sensitive. But what you seem to be implying here is that spiritual tissue isn't just in the body, it's all around us.
Yeah, I would say that all matter is spiritual tissue in that sense. Not just the human body, but the body of every other animal, the body of plants, the body of the planet itself, the body of the galaxy and the cosmos is spiritual tissue.
Well, before we get too far out,
Yes.
let me bring up the concept of apophenia.
Please do.
Apophenia is a psychiatric term. It's often associated with schizophrenia, but it's the projection of meaning into events where there really is no meaning. Of course, that's a subjective thing, but many people who are experiencing mental illness might believe that if they turn on the radio and listen to, let's say, a Beatles song, that John Lennon wrote that song specifically to them. It's a message from them. Or they turn on the radio and they hear aliens speaking to them. They're projecting their own inner psyche onto the world at large and calling that a synchronicity. That would be an error.
Yes. It's one of the things that I think we really need to pay attention to as philosophers, but as just people in general, is the difference between an experience and our interpretations of our experience. In an earlier conversation, I was saying that we need to cultivate far more awareness of our in-the-moment direct experience rather than rely on our beliefs and our belief systems that can get us into trouble.
Yes.
However, every one of us at every moment is having an experience. We don't have to do anything about that. It just comes with the package of being in existence, is that every sentient being is having an experience at every moment. In the case of beings like us with a complex nervous system and a brain and a neocortex, we have the capacity to intellectually interpret the experience. And that happens almost automatically, instantaneously.
Yes.
We have an experience, we interpret the experience. The interpretation then gets solidified into a thought. The interpretation is a thought. It gets solidified into a belief system. Meanwhile, while we're going through the process of solidifying our interpretations, some other time has moved on and some new experience is happening. But we are no longer paying attention to the new experience in the present moment. We're now caught up in the abstractions of the thoughts that relate to an experience that no longer is.
Yes.
So in that sense, thoughts and beliefs always take us away from the reality of what's happening in the moment. And that's why I think psycho-spiritual practices are designed to bring us back into the current moment so we can experience reality as is happening rather than our interpretations of reality. I think in schizophrenia, what happens is that, and in that sense, each one of us is schizophrenic to some degree, to the extent that we believe our interpretations of our experience to be the reality, rather than the experience itself being the reality.
Well, and we do this all the time, moment by moment. We're always interpreting.
Yes.
After all, you're speaking to me, and I need to interpret your concepts before I reply.
Exactly. And also what I think enhances our communication is as well as in cognitively interpreting each other's linguistic utterances, is that we feel our connection, we feel each other, we feel our own bodies in the moment, and then feel the relatedness between us. That, I think, gives a deeper and richer texture to the quality of the speaking that we have. And if we feel our thinking rather than just think our thoughts and speak in abstractions, if our communication is deeply embodied, it's going to have a richer texture to it and a deeper meaning.
Well, coming back around to synchronicity and the issue of, it seems there are two issues. One, as you mentioned, is the consciousness that pervades the entire universe. So there's no reason to think that we could not be receiving messages from the universe, perhaps all the time, in fact, on the one hand, and on the other hand, to avoid the pitfall of assuming that somehow we are special and that the universe is trying to communicate to us perhaps in a way that reinforces our own dark side or our own ego or something. There are so many pitfalls on every spiritual path.
Yes.
And synchronicity being a perfect example. It can seem so sublime on the one hand and so ridiculous at the same time on the other.
Yeah, so we need to, I think, be attentive to two different meanings of the word meaning. There's symbolic meaning, which is the meaning that involves interpretation. But then there's experiential meaning. The meaning, I define meaning as the experiential fit between self and other, between self and non-self. So for me, my life is meaningful, not to the extent that I can have interpretations that are coherent. That can be useful, but it's meaningful to the sense that I experience myself fitting into my world. Then my life has meaning. If I'm a misfit, then my life lacks meaning. So meaning is an experienced fit between self and what lies beyond the self.
Very elegantly put, Christian de Quincey. Thank you so much for sharing this half hour with me on the elusive topic of synchronicity.
Thank you. Thank you.
And thank you for being with us.